Hi everybody, Fat Steve, Spices Media, and I'm going to carry on with another one of my mad life stories. And I've already done the first time I went to prison in the 80s, and this time I'm going to give you the second time I went, the VAT frauds. So you should have seen most of the videos now about the VAT frauds. So here we go.
Hi everybody, it's Fat Steve.
Hello, it's Fat Sandra, but I'm not fat.
And together, we're Spices Media.
So, sentenced at Manchester Crown. So they took me to Strangeways. That was nice. So I was taken in through reception. At reception, the first man I sat down with asked me my name. I told him it was Captain Richard Williams. He giggled. He said, "Nobody's going to call you Captain in here." I said, "Well, there's my driving licence. That's my name, Captain Richard Williams." And he just smiled and put it in an envelope, and he said, "You're going to be called Richard. Richard Williams." I said, "Okay, not a problem." Anyway, I got processed. They took me in onto A wing, and I got a nice empty cell on A wing, which I thought was lovely. I spent about 3 hours cleaning it. I was quite surprised because of the differences over the years from the 80s to modern times, when they had a television and they had electric lights you could turn on and off, and a toilet and a sink. It was quite different to the old slop out days. So I cleaned this from top to bottom and I was really happy. And then about midnight the door opened and they threw this guy in who was drunk, who climbed up on the top bunk. He pissed on me, he was sick on me, and I just had to put up with it. Nothing much I could do, snoring all night, so I kept awake. The next morning I got moved to a wing called H1, which was at Strangeways, and it had been a former block, so it was enclosed like a dungeon. I think there were 17 cells on it. And most of the people there had some form of disability or issues. There were a few in wheelchairs. So I was called Richard by everybody. And then an officer came on the wing one day that knew me family and knew me from years ago. He chatted to the two officers on the wing, who looked at me and said, "Are you okay, Stephen?" I said, "Stephen?" And they looked at me and said, "Yeah, we've heard that you're called Stephen. Do they know that was your original?" Yeah, I said, "They know my name. I changed my name. I've got the depot, and so my name now is Captain Richard Williams." So they looked at each other and they said, "Well, it just says Richard Williams here." I said, "Yeah, because the man when I came in told me nobody's going to call me Captain." So anyway, they were happy with that, and it was only the third or fourth night I was there and I took ill. I'd got chest pain. They came and got me out of the cell. They put me in a wheelchair. They took me to the healthcare, and I was laid on a trolley with an ECG, and some of the nurses and one of the doctors were there, and this nice woman came in with these two officers. And she looked at me and she smiled and she said, are you okay? Are they taking good care of you?" I said, "Yes, thank you." I said, "They're doing okay, and they're waiting for an ambulance, I think." And she said, oh, right, are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And she said, "You're Captain Williams, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, miss, but I've been told I have to be called Richard Williams in here." She said, "Why?" She said, "Your name is Captain. You're the only person in Britain with that Christian name, although it was a deed poll change." I said, "Yes." I said, and who are you, miss?" and she said, I'm Governor Terry Williams. So she was the #1 governor in the prison, and if she said I was called Captain Richard Williams, then from that moment on, that was the name that everybody accepted. So quite a funny little twist there. And on the last day when I was being released and sent to Kirkham, the officer that had first told me I was going to be called Richard from now got me property out, and when he was taking me property to take it to Kirkham, they couldn't find my driving licence, strangely enough. So anyway, back to Strangeways. So I was put on this ring called H1. We were opened every morning about 8 o'clock to get meds, and we'd got our breakfast packs the night before normally, which were cereal and a carton of milk, and we were more or less left open till just before lunch, and then we were banged up till 2 o'clock with our lunch. Then the doors opened and we was more or less left to wander up and down the wing and to do different things as we wanted. There was always 2 officers there. Met a lot of strange, crazy people in there on that wing. Most of them, I said, had some sort of illness or disability or mental illness. I met a man who he had a cat, and he loved his cat. It was his world. Can't remember his name. And this cat got a rash, and he took it to the vets, and the vet couldn't work out what it was, and the vet reported him to the RSPCA, and the RSPCA came and said he'd not been treating it right, and they took it off him. And this cat was his world. So as you do when you have them sort of mental illnesses, he's online and he's sending death threats to the RSPCA, and then suddenly his door gets smashed in and he gets arrested and he gets convicted under a terrorism act and sent to Belmarsh over a fucking cat. So after a few months there, they realised that it was a bit of a mistake and he was mentally ill, and so they sent him to Strangeways, and because of his illness he was on the wing that I was on, and whilst he was there he got a letter from the RSPCA apologising. Who's that? He got this letter apologising because the cat had a tropical disease and he hadn't hurt it or mistreated it, but he'd been convicted of sending them these emails, and he was banned for life from having any pets. So even when he got out, he wouldn't be able to have his cat back. So that was just one little strange story. There was another guy on remand waiting, and he said, yeah, what is this? Yeah, I'm a bit of a drug dealer, you know, and I do a few deals, and I've got this Mercedes, and I've got this motorbike, and I'm in my flat, I'm in my luxury flat, you know, in Manchester, and my alarm goes off on my bike, so I look out the window, and there's all these kids messing around my bike, like sitting on it and messing, touching things. So I went down, you know, with my gun, like you would, and I'm going, hey, just get off them, and I'm waving it about like that, and it just went off in my hand, and the bullet went across the road on these flats and killed this fucking woman. And it wasn't my fault. If they hadn't been messing with my car, it wouldn't have happened, would it? And they're all blaming me and that. I'm waiting, they told me I might get lifed off for killing this woman, and how could it be my fault? I was just trying to protect my property from these kids. So these were some of the stories that we had to listen to, and I told them my story, and all they did was keep asking me for money for jobs they wanted to do. Now there was a cleaner on the wing, quite a quiet chap, could get a bit upset now and again, and he Right, what are you in for? Oh, I had a problem in a church. All right, so a few weeks go on, and he goes to court, comes back. What happened? How did you go on? Oh, well, I were in this church, and I saw this woman with this handbag, and I thought I'll reach over and nick her handbag. So I reached over, and I got the bag, and when I pulled it, she'd got it round her arm. And I'm pulling harder, hoping it'll break, and it didn't. And she stood up, and as I pulled it, she fell over, and then she broke her hip. And it's like I've got done for Section 18, robbery, attempted robbery. 7 years he got, 7 years, and they still had him as the cleaner on the wing. And another guy on this wing, H1 it was called. It had been a former block and the roof was covered in, so the rest of H wing was above it and completely separate. So sometimes some of the inmates would kick off and jump up and down on the net, which you might have seen in films. And there was a prolific man that kept doing this, and he was called Callum Brown. He was a lifer. I think he was the only proper neo-Nazi in the prison system with a swastika tattooed on his head. And he caused that many problems for the prison. They'd had him in the block, the intervention unit and everywhere. And they decided to give him a chance and put him on H1, where he was contained. And I spoke to him a few times. He asked me to get him a Quran. And I got one of the officers to get me a Quran from the library, and I gave it him. Little did I know, within a few minutes he was using it as toilet paper, and then throwing it out the window on the exercise yard of where the people that read the Quran were walking. Then he started setting fire to pages and throwing them out. They raided his cell and took the book off him, and the man that got it for me didn't grass me up, so it didn't cause me any grief. Then a few weeks later, there it is this morning, there's two of the nicest officers in the world looking after us. We're open, we're up and down, and suddenly one of the imams walked on the wing, who was supposed to know not to come on with the wing. He got through the door about 4 feet, he turned, he locked it, and Mr. Brown set off running from his cell with a plastic knife, started stabbing him in the neck and face and chest. He fell to the ground. The two officers saw what was happening, come out of the office, went over trying to pull Callum off. Callum was up, jumping round, threatening them. And there's a thing in prison about being a nonce and being a grass, and a grass is as bad as a nonce. But in this situation, they were two decent, respectable prison officers. And people were just stood there, and I pressed the emergency bell, which sets an alarm off. And officers come running from all over the prison. They eventually detained him. Off he went, back to the interventions unit, I think. We all got banged up, so never found out really if he'd killed this guy or not, but I myself, I think he had. Just an innocent Muslim imam walking on the wing. So that was Callum Brown, the only neo-Nazi in the prison system. Now, there was another gentleman that used to look after me a lot. He was autistic, a bit like Dawn, but a different type of autism. When he didn't get his own way, he'd kick off, he'd bang on the door, and the governor would come and quieten him down, or he'd want a cigarette, or he'd want something. And they always looked after him and gave him things because he was such a nuisance. And one particular night he's kicking off, and it goes on for about an hour, and eventually they wrap him up, hands behind his back, lead him off the wing, put him in the block. And then the story come back that he'd used his false teeth to dig the plaster out the wall in the block and found a water pipe. And he'd pulled this pipe out and he'd bent it and back and forwards till it snapped, as it would. And it flooded the cell. And then they came and the doors opened inwards. And because there's so much water in the cell, they couldn't open the door from the hallway. And it's like coming up here and he's shouting and bawling to get out. And if it had gone above his head, it would have drowned him and trapped him in this cell. Now, eventually it got so far and he broke the windows. So he stood on a radiator and the water's pouring out the windows. They had to cut the water off to the block till it stopped coming in and receded eventually. And very nice guy, I'm not going to say his name, but if you ever see this, thank you for looking after me. I was quite ill at the time and quite a lot of violent people on that wing. So that's another one. Another thing on that wing, there was a man, give me a lot of stress what had happened with that, and I was quite ill a few nights later. And remember, I've told you when I was at Walton, I got put in the hospital and it was the most frightening time of my life. Well, this time I was quite ill and the medics come and they decided to move me to healthcare. So I got to healthcare and they put me in this room, a bit different from the 80s. It actually had a mattress and sheets that were full of blood. No knives and forks, just a bowl. So the first meal was served through a hatch from a ladle. I had to put the bowl out, they slopped it in. Now, getting to a bit more about the hospital. I've told you in the past what the one at Walton was like in the 80s. Here in the Strangeways in the 90s, there was one little ward, I think, which I never saw, and then cells like in a normal prison, quite dirty, quite grubby. You could see out the hatch, and opposite where I was there was a row of cells with different labels on the door, and one said spitter, one said shit thrower. That was about the only two I think I could find. When I did come out of the cell and turned right and get to a corridor, there was a row of cells that didn't have prison cell doors on. They had sort of big 2-inch thick bars that somebody could see through. The corridor was about 5 foot wide, and opposite each one of these 3 or 4 cells was an officer sat on a chair with a little like stand with a huge notepad on it, and he had to watch the prisoners in these cells, and every time they turned over, coughed, farted, moved, ate something, went for a wee, he had to write it down. They were obviously on some sort of watch, and I think Shipman had been in one of them, but not at the time that I was there, I don't think. And this was quite a frightening place. The doors opposite, the people in there, they'd been in the block, they'd been in the interventions unit, and they've done everything they can, and at the end of the day all they can do is put them in healthcare and sedate them. So 2 or 3 times a day somebody would look through the hatch. They'd wear a visor if they were shit throwers or spitters to see that the prisoner was asleep, and then every so often about 6 of them would come. There'd be a senior officer, a principal officer and an assistant governor, and a few officers, they'd open the door, they'd go in, they'd pin the guy down, inject him in the bottom with, I think it was chloral hydrate to knock them out, and that would keep them from hurting anybody. So that's a little bit about the healthcare in Strangeways. About 10-15 years ago. Might have changed now, I don't know, but they do have to do something to detain these people. So getting back to where I was, and I was a lot better about an hour later. Then I heard the main alarm go off and officers were panicking, running up and down. Nobody came and fed us in the evening, and in the morning the hatch opened and the breakfast pack you normally get of the night was passed through, and somebody came to see me, and when I asked what was wrong, they said it was locked down the whole prison because a guy got on the roof. I can't remember his name. He was on the roof throwing tiles off for 2 days. So 2 days I was stuck in the hospital again, just like Walton, but this was Strangeways. It was near Easter again, and another quite terrifying experience. I think it was day 3 I got took back to the main ring, and everybody else had been treated the same. Everybody had been on sandwiches for days. So that's just a little bit more about the wing in Strangeways. Anyway, I'd met Terry Williams, the #1 governess. She was very nice, she looked after me. But after a few months, the regime changed, and the whole prison was desperate for staff, really, and what they had to do was, if you didn't go to work or go to education, you was banged up 23 hours a day. So lots of people unemployed, but we weren't technically unemployed. We were sick and we couldn't go to work, and we couldn't go to the library. The library was upstairs and the education block was upstairs, and the work was right across the prison on the other side. So they opened us an hour a day. Now, Fat Steve, being as he is, he's looking at this and he's thinking this, because we don't work or go to education, this is clear discrimination on us, disability discrimination. So in the prison system there's several apps for complaining which just tend to get thrown away, but there is a specific very, very powerful act for disability discrimination. So I said there were about 17 of us on the wing with disabilities, so I told them all what to write and they all signed them and we all posted them, and it took just 2 days, and 2 days, miracle, and my door opened and Terry Williams walked in with a handful of disability discrimination claims, and she looked at me and she frowned and she said, "What the fuck have you done to me, Captain?" I said, what miss, what? She said, "You fucking know damn well what." And she threw them on the floor and she said, "Pack your stuff, you're going to B-Wing in 5 minutes. So here I was, well looked after, well protected on this little wing, and they put me in a wheelchair and they wheeled me to B-Wing with half my stuff missing because I couldn't pack it fast enough. And so I'm like 55, I think, something like that, in a wheelchair with grey hair. Well, what sort of people that age with grey hair in wheelchairs go to prison? There's only fraudsters and the others that are on the special wing. So as they're wheeling me on this wing, there's 400 people on B-Wing in 2 sections, And as they're wheeling me on, they straight away they went nonce, 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 nonce. So I'm wheeling on, and this screw's saying, just take no notice, lad, take no notice. So he wheels me down. There's a cell on the wands opposite the servery, and he opens this cell and he looks in and he says, at lunchtime when they open this door, they'll probably kill you, lad. I said, well, can I have some help? And then just smirked and shut the door. So I'm sat there thinking, yeah, this is going to be good, isn't it? So to try and relax, because they're already pouring cups of piss through the hatch, shouting, calling me a nonce, and dropping lit tissues through the hatch. So anyway, I put this telly on and turns it on, and bang, there it is in front of me. BBC, Saints and Scroungers. Well, they made this documentary to discredit me and make me look terrible. So it's talking about me and my VAT frauds and my ex-wife and the VAT frauds. I might have told you this before, but never in such detail. And so I'm watching, and then they're all talking outside and they're shouting out the window, that's that guy that's just come on the ones. And blah, blah. So then I hear this bell, and it's going to be lunchtime, and the door opens, and I'm like hiding behind the bunk beds with pillows and everything, and the first one comes in, all right mate, have you got any money left? We've got this job we want to do. And everybody were nice to me, and then somebody took me and got me lunch for me, and then they gave me the sandwich. And so the BBC had made this documentary, but it ended up saving my life, to be strange. So on this wing, the officers knew that I had some semblance of intelligence and that I'd been a mentor for years. So they gave me all the statements, all the apps, all the different applications for different things. I kept them on the top of the bunk bed, and I've become like a little mini office and mentor, with people coming to me with problems all day long and trying to help them and sort them out and get the visits sorted, get the special diets sorted. So particular on this wing, also they give me a job helping the cleaners, so I got the green clothing for the cleaner. So I'm in this wheelchair whizzing up and down. I've got a mop in one hand, a bucket in, I'm pushing with one hand, and then I've go back, I've got the mop in one hand of the wheelchair in the other, then the bucket and so I had this job, and there was a lot of other cleaners, and this particular day a new SO took over, and he noticed that half the cleaners just did the cleaning job because they got to go to the gym every day, and some got to go and play football on the field, and he wasn't very happy with that, so he sacked them. Now, two of these cleaners, one guy was called Pardy, and his mate, I can't remember his name, and they'd put special bunks in their cell because they were both nearly 7 foot tall. So they had special bunks, special mattresses. So these were two of the cleaners who got sacked. I'd always got on with them, I'd helped them, there'd been no issue. But remember, they'd been sacked and I hadn't, so the cripple in the wheelchair had not been sacked. So I come out of the cell this day in my greens, I get in the wheelchair, and this one called Pardy, I think, he stood on the ones or the twos, and he leans over and says, have you still got your job? I said, yeah. Fucking hell, this is wrong, this is not on the original. And this young female officer that was brand new to the wing walked past, and she just said, stop bullying Captain Pardy. Not the best thing to say to very large, very dangerous people in prison. So it was just an hour later, and I was down the wing doing something, when somebody run up behind me with a bucket of piss and shit and swilled me from behind. So I'm covered in this piss and shit, and the alarm went off, everybody gets banged up. they take me to the shower, I get clean, then they tell me, you're not going back to that wing. So they wheel me and they put me on what was called I wing, which was the drug and alcohol wing. And again, he banged up there nearly 24 hours a day. That was quite depressing. That was quite bad. That was probably just a week or so before I went to Kirkham. But I'm going to leave you there. And then in the next video, I should talk about going to Kirkham, which was absolute paradise. And it certainly was strange ways. Now there's a song about it, isn't there? The Mike Harding song. Last Saturday night I got into a fight. I can't remember how it goes. And I woke up on Wednesday with an heck of a fright. And the judge said, young fell, you're going for a spell. 6 months hard labour in the Strangeways Hotel. Toodaloo, I can tell there's no place on earth like the Strangeways Hotel.
So bye everybody, Fat Sandra and Fat Steve, Spices Media.